So I've talked recently actually about the three phases of psychosis, which are the prodromal phase, acute phase, and recovery phase, which basically is like an arc. So the prodromal phase, which I talked about already, is the incline going into a psychotic break, and the acute phase is the actual break, the time it takes to be out of reality, going through symptoms of hallucinations and delusions. And then the recovery phase is what length of time it takes to come out of that. It can actually be longer than the episode itself, and it can be just as hard on a person as the episode itself. So, from my experience having episodes of psychosis, I do go through that full arc. I'm not like the kind of person who lives in psychosis all the time. It's not something that just never goes away, because for me, when I have medical intervention and I'm hospitalized and I get on meds, I can come out of those episodes. Without the medications, I'd probably just always be psychotic. So because the length of my episodes is contained within the time that it takes to get medical intervention, they usually only last a few months. I mean, a few months, that's kind of an understatement, because my longest one was over a year. No one knew what psychosis was that was like around me, like my family. So it went on for a really long time. I think my shortest episode must have been something like 6 months. But I'm going to talk about my worst episode, because that was the one with the hardest recovery phase, which I think is like a really clear example of what that can be like. And that episode was 9 months long. And in the first 5 months of that episode, I was actively psychotic. And then I finally did get into a hospital and was given meds, and it took a long time for the meds to kick in. So it was another 4 months before I was completely out of psychosis. And by that, I mean, it was another 4 months until I wasn't actively hallucinating or having delusions anymore. They stopped being constant. They started becoming like intermittent. I had brief periods of time in which I was aware of reality again, until they tapered off enough that I was back in reality, but there was still a lot of hard work ahead of me. So while the acute phase of psychosis is a huge adrenaline rush, it's very heightened and chaotic and scary and just dramatic, like your whole life is on constant, full speed. That is nothing like the recovery phase. It's quite the opposite. It's a long process of blunted emotions, pretty much being like completely vacant inside, having no emotions, having minimal ability to communicate, and it takes a long time to get things back that you lost. There's a lot of things that you can lose. For me, after my worst episode, I lost a lot. I went catatonic, which is basically when I couldn't really move. Like I would just be kind of locked in myself, and I couldn't really talk, and I didn't have thoughts, which is kind of hard to describe because you'd kind of need the thoughts to describe it. But there was just like an absence of thought, and I couldn't talk with people unless it was like a yes or no question. And I think that was in part because it was hard to think, but also because I just lost the ability to form sentences. So that was one thing I lost. I also lost a lot of memory, which never really recovered. So I have permanent memory loss from all of my episodes accumulated over time. I lost reading comprehension skills, which is another thing that never really recovered. So I'm a lot slower at reading, and I can't read a lot without losing all sense of what I'm reading. I used to read for hours at a time, and now I can only handle a few chunks before I'm not really processing things anymore, which has gotten better. I've worked on that, but I don't think it'll ever completely come back. And I lost a bit of my IQ. I think I'm an intelligent person, and I think I'm articulate, but I'm nowhere near as quick-witted as I used to be. It takes me a longer time to process what people are saying to me. I have to put in more effort in a conversation to comprehend what's being said by other people. I don't know how much of that is just like a cognitive loss and how much of it is like a loss of my intelligence, but things are slower now, like a little bit slower. They are, I've noticed that. My vocabulary was really hard to get back, and it took like 18 months just to get back the level of vocabulary I had before. And it was really hard for me because I tend to use a wide variety of words, and I tend to just call upon them easily. I can just think of a word without really any hesitation, but back then I had a very small vocabulary and I would reuse a lot of words over and over again for different situations, whereas now I have my full breadth of vocabulary back and I can think on my toes with words. Not so much with like logic, but I'm pretty good with words. Now, the span of time that it took to get all of these cognitive abilities back was drastically long. You know, my episode was 9 months, but it was about 18 months before it was mostly restored, aside from the things that are completely impaired, like my memory. And I think in the first 4 months, I was relearning how to talk. So that was the time in which I went from saying yes or no answers to full sentences to like actually articulating thoughts. And the reading comprehension took a couple more months after that to be able to like read again. And that began with reading sentences at a time and sort of trying to understand that, then being able to read a paragraph and even just understanding it. The intelligence, like the IQ stuff, took up to 18 months. Like that was really hard to get back. And other things, I think maybe like motor skills were hard to get back. Playing guitar, I had to kind of relearn. Drawing, I had to kind of relearn. I'm an artist, I'm a part-time artist, so I do sell my art. But after that episode, I had the artistic ability that I had in elementary school. And I'm talented. I'm not bragging. I am. I know I am. So I had to relearn that. It took me a year to draw every single day just to get my level of artistic ability back. There's also a span of time that I feel was just dedicated to relearning reality, what it really is, readjusting to real life as everyone else knew it, as I used to know it. And I came into that not being able to unsee a lot of really traumatic things. Like I used to have hallucinations of being on fire or being tortured by surgeons who were like attaching body parts, taking body parts from me. So that was something that I had to go back into normal life with and return to having a normal life carrying a lot of trauma. So that in itself was difficult. Also, it's very boring. Like it's incredibly boring coming back into reality, because outside of reality in Psychosis, my reality was constantly changing and it was always heightened. It was always like the climax of a movie at every second. Very dramatic. And then I got stuck in this long stretch of boring, ordinary life where there's no action, there's no excitement, there's just bleak existence. And that in itself was depressing. It made me feel very nihilistic, and I was very nihilistic for a while because I just felt that life had no meaning. And it's like I had this weird like hangover where I couldn't shake this creepy, eerie feeling no matter how stable I'd become, because now I was aware of what had happened and I could look back on these memories and be like, what the fuck did I go through? It's a lot to accept. And I gotta say, feeling like myself is something, it's different today. I feel like myself, but I don't feel like who I used to be. I feel like the person I was before Psychosis was like sacrificed to the illness, because that person never came out of Psychosis. This new person came out of Psychosis. There's a lot of things about me that are similar, things that are the same, but they've been tainted. And things like my art style have changed, my fashion sense has changed, my personality has changed. I'm more introverted now, whereas before I was extroverted. I used to be very optimistic. Now I'm pretty much like pessimistic at best. I became super cynical and hated everyone. No matter how nice they were to me, I just hated everyone. And before, I had like a deep faith in humanity and believed in everyone and gave them a million chances. My name is the same, like I look the same, but I am not the same. That was the biggest change, and that's permanent. Like I said, Psychosis is very traumatizing. Like those hallucinations I had were just the tip of the iceberg. I actually had a lot worse ones than that I just can't talk about. And most of the trauma I mean, not most of it, but like the trauma experience, it doesn't hit until you're recovering, because when you're in it, you're not really aware. You're also in survival mode constantly, so you don't know what's happening. But when you come out of it, that's when you start to process it and you understand what you went through, and you remember from like a more clear-headed perspective what that was like, instead of the kind of filter of psychosis that blocks out your conscious. So I struggle with that, and I deal with that in therapy. That is the longest part of the recovery, is the PTSD that comes with it. I believe it's PTSD because I have PTSD and this was worse. So it's not a great experience. None of it is a great experience. The prodromal phase, acute phase, recovery phase, they all take over your life. All of them are very debilitating. All of them put your life on hold for an indefinite amount of time until you get better. And once you're better, you're never really the same. So that's kind of what it's like. It's pretty insane. I don't think I really do any of this justice by talking about psychosis, because the experience itself is indescribable and so incredibly heightened. But I do my very best to translate it to people and try to help people understand from like a small perspective what it looks like at the very least, and what it feels like to the best that I can explain.